The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Hello and welcome to a midsummer special episode of The Amber Mack Show. Amber's taking a much-deserved break this week, but she'll be joining us through two previously aired video interviews she conducted on topics that resonate as much today as they did when they originally aired. Later in the show, Amber's going to talk with urban planning thought leader Brent Toderian on managing change as our cities evolve, from bike lanes to Cybertrucks and beyond. But first up, as hundreds of wildfires burn out of control in the US and Canada, recently resulting in Toronto, New York, and Washington, D.C. having some of the worst air quality levels in the world, we've got John Vaillant, the author of best-selling book Fire Weather, to explain why this is happening and what the future holds for our warming planet. Here's Amber's interview.
John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Really good to be with you.
You coined a term in the book called the 21st century fires. What exactly does this mean?
Well, it means a few things. I think a number of fire scientists and climate scientists are all recognizing that we're entering a new era. Stephen Pine, kind of the eminence grise, the granddaddy of fire science, calls it the Pyrocene age. But 21st century fire is basically bigger, faster, hotter, more destructive, harder to suppress.
Before we talk about the book a little bit further, I know one thing that you do in the setup to this story is talk about a bit of the history of Fort McMurray. How did this place come to be this center that it's known as today?
Yeah, the first big extraction project in Canada was beaver furs. And the Athabasca River, northern Alberta, that region had what were considered to be in the 18th century the finest beaver pelts in the country, which is saying something. And the numbers of beavers that came out of there, including through the trading post at Fort McMurray, which was founded 150 years ago, in 1870, 175 years ago, were legendary. Tens of hundreds of thousands of pelts were taken out of there by hand, killed by hand, and then transported by canoe back to Montreal and then shipped to the UK and Europe for hat manufacturing. So as those traders discovered these seeps of bitumen and also little bubblings up of natural gas, and they had no idea what the value of those things would be, but they took note. And later, petroleum prospectors returned to that area and started trying to extract it. And it's really one of the most difficult projects undertaken by Canadian extractors. There was an enormous amount of U.S. help, and now it's consolidating back into mostly Canadian-owned companies, but those Canadian companies have a lot of foreign ownership. So it's really kind of an international project.
It's interesting when I was starting to read your book, I suppose that I wanted to believe that the destruction wasn't as intense as it actually was. But when you read about these early days in Fort McMurray and the upheaval of entire forests and the machinery that they're using to dig up these amazing trees that are hundreds and hundreds of years old, I mean, that is something that I wonder today, could that even happen in the context of so much social media around and people paying attention? But it feels to me like it was a time where did people just turn a blind eye to what was taking place?
Amber, people are turning a blind eye right now. The forest is still being cleared. The river is still being polluted. The huge tailings ponds that cover many, many square miles of destroyed forest are still expanding. It's around 1,000 square miles of forest have been totally destroyed, cleared off, stripped out, and mined. And the tailings ponds, which are basically hold effluent from this melting, diluting, upgrading process that is, again, incredibly energy intensive to the tune of billions of cubic feet of natural gas every day, every week, being burned in order to simply to liquefy and separate this bitumen from the sand. This is ongoing to this day. Even after the fire, which shut this, evacuated the city, the largest, most rapid evacuation due to fire in modern times and shut down this multi-billion-dollar industry for many weeks. They've now expanded since then, and they've built the city back exactly the way it was before. And on they go. So this is not something that's in the past. It's not from a less enlightened time. It's still going and still has ambitious plans to grow even bigger.
Let's talk about The Making of a Beast. This is the subtitle of your book and the events surrounding the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfire, which caused billions of dollars in damage, essentially melted vehicles, as I learned in the book, more than 80,000 people driven from their homes. So walk us through this without maybe taking everything away in terms of the tremendous amount of detail in the book. What happened? Why was this sort of a perfect storm in some ways in terms of seeing a wildfire of this significance?
So Alberta has been in semi-drought conditions for a number of years. The rainfall and snowpack have dropped off considerably, double-digit percentages year over year. And the boreal forest, which is this enormous ecosystem in northern Canada, runs from coast to coast. It's the wettest biome on Earth, wetter than the tropical jungle, is drying out. And so you have these already flammable places. The boreal burns naturally. It's how it regenerates itself. But these fires now, because it's drier, because it's hotter up there now than it used to be, these fires burn more intensely. And on May 3rd, 2016, there were 5 different wildfires burning in and around Fort McMurray. The temperature record for that day was broken by 6 degrees Celsius. The relative humidity was comparable to Death Valley. And these fires, under those conditions, really stopped being fires and turned into explosive firestorms. And there was ample warning. There was long-range forecasting, short-range forecasting, hourly forecasting, all of which was impeccable. So the meteorologists did their job, fire scientists did their job, but this fire was completely overwhelming to firefighters. The amount of energy being released, the speed with which it moved, the incredible heat it was generating. So these fires, it was basically a wall of flame, roughly 50 to 100 meters tall, 10 kilometers wide, that swept into the southwest side of the city, basically like a wave. And the heat coming off the leading edge of these fires is absolutely face-meltingly ferocious. It's basically 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 500 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than the planet Venus. It desiccates everything in front of it and then elevates it beyond combustive temperatures. And so when you exert that kind of thermal energy on a modern house, vinyl siding, plastic swing set, rubber tires, tar shingles, all those petroleum products, because that's what they are, start to off gas. And so now what you have over the city is this cloud of explosive gas. And that's why houses in Fort McMurray, $750,000, 50-ton structures burnt from the roof to the basement in 6 minutes. And I did not believe this when firefighters told me. And I interviewed a lot of firefighters who were trying to fight this fire against all odds, really, all over the city. And I heard 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I eventually got on board with them because they were timing it on their watches. And these houses were burning in ways that none of them had ever seen before. And water has no effect on heat like that. It doesn't matter if it's coming from a water bomber or a water hose. All they could do is try to get as many people out as they could and then run for their lives and try to save their fire trucks.
I wanted to ask you about this because when I was reading the book, you talk about some of this advanced firefighting infrastructure, technology, training. I mean, when we look at Fort McMurray, they have all of these things. Most people may think, okay, well, they are well equipped to deal with a fire like this. But like you said, it appears as though, they couldn't even make a dent in what happened in 2016.
And what makes that even more sobering is the fact that a lot of this equipment is designed for petrochemical fires, because these upgraders and these facilities, these bitumen processing facilities, are explosive, flammable, dangerous places. And so you have very well-trained firefighters with state-of-the-art equipment to deal with explosive petrochemical fires. And they brought that equipment to bear on the fires in Fort McMurray. And really the best they could do is create water curtains around places that hadn't burned yet. But they could not put out fires that had already ignited. And so they had to resort to increasingly radical measures to try to control the spread of this fire, including bulldozing brand new homes to try to basically make a fire break through the neighborhood. And that was, those are some amazing interviews with the backhoe operators and bulldozer operators who were working on day 3 and day 4 of this fire, burning night and day through the city, trying to basically save neighborhoods by destroying them. It really was over the top and unprecedented. And some measures were successful, but we lost, I think, 2,500 homes, and many thousands more were severely damaged by heat and water and shrapnel from exploding objects. It was really like a war zone in there.
I want people to get their own copy of the book, to read all of the details of what happened, all the interviews that you did for the book. One of the things that really surprised me is that I think I would have assumed that maybe the fire was burning for a few days or a few weeks, but that was not the case. This fire was burning for many, many months.
This fire broke all kinds of records. In terms of burning inside the city limits of Fort McMurray, it was in there for a good 5 or 6 days. In other words, firefighters were actively putting out fires within the city limits. And that's pretty much unprecedented outside of the realm of really famous historic fires like the Great Fire of London in 1666 and the Great Edo Fire in what's now Tokyo, Japan, and I think it was 1753, but you have to go way back to find a fire burning in city limits for day and night for that long. But it burnt through the forest to the tune of, I just know the miles, 2,500 square miles of forest were burnt in the Fort McMurray fire. And it burnt all through the fall. It went underground in the winter. It reemerged the next spring and was not declared officially out until August of 2017. That's 15 months after it ignited. The sad fact is any city in Canada can now burn the way Fort McMurray did. Because of elevated heat, because of drought, because of the impacts of heat domes, we are all much more vulnerable than we used to be. And when you lose your home or when you're evacuated, that means you're not working. That means you're dealing with enormous anxiety. And this is, this kind of invisible, there's a couple of kind of companions to fire that we don't factor in as much. And, smoke is a really big one. It's P2, these P2 particles that come out of wood smoke, burning trees and houses, are demonstrably toxic to human beings. And Canada has been generating a lot of this through its burning fires. I think we've burnt about 6 million hectares this fire season alone, which is massive. On top of that, you have the anxiety and the stress and the trauma of seeing a massive fire come into your town, which is really one of the most terrifying things a human being can experience. And one way to think about this is 10 years ago, if we had asked Amber and PEI where you are, or Vancouver where I am, if we'd asked our friends, who do we know who's been evacuated due to fire or put on alert, those would be very patchy numbers, and it would be uneven across the country. Now, I bet every single Canadian, from PEI to Vancouver Island to Newfoundland, knows somebody who's been evacuated or been put on alert. So that's the country we live in now. And the other piece of data that really should sober all of us is I did a couple of keynotes for Red Cross Canada last year, talking to the CEO, Conrad Sauvé, and he told me when he started working for Red Cross Canada, about 80% of their work was done outside the country, which is what you would expect of a wealthy, generous country like Canada. Most of its relief work would be done outside the country. That was 15 or 20 years ago. Now, 80% of Red Cross relief work is done inside Canada, dealing with floods, fires, and storms that are growing in intensity and impacting more people more grievously. And the fallout from that, besides displacement, lost income, lost property, is trauma. And PTSD, I would say, is now a national epidemic as a result of these traumatic fires and floods.
I think that's absolutely true. And, not specific to wildfires, but here on Prince Edward Island, when the island was hit by Hurricane Fiona just a few years ago,
Right.
you also don't hear those stories that have an impact on individuals and communities and maybe don't make it to mainstream media or to social media. So, for example, on Prince Edward Island, even my own family who lives in a coastal community, my mom wasn't impacted during the storm, but because of all the trees that fell, and then she was cleaning up her yard, and then she tripped over some of the debris and broke her shoulder, and then there were weeks and weeks of rehabilitation. It strikes me that people don't think about these stories, like you say, sort of the aftermath of the impact of some of these storms and wildfires, because those stories aren't going to make the news, but this is months and months of issues, whether it's PTSD or injury or people out of work to these communities.
Couldn't agree with you more. And it takes so many different forms. And, we talk about gifts that keep on giving. Well, these disasters keep on taking. And the recovery exposes people like your mother to hazards, but also, electricians and builders and earth movers are all exposed. Another thing that happens commonly after big fires, especially out west, is flooding. The trees are now dead. The roots are no longer holding the soil. The chemical composition of the soil can actually be changed by the intensity of the fire. And then when the next flood comes, the roots aren't there to hold the soil. So you can lose whole mountainsides and valleys, and they go into the river, they foul the river, they destroy the fish habitat. So this can go on for years following a fire that, might have taken a week or a month or a few months to burn. So there's this cascade effect, human and natural, on our country that's ongoing right now.
We'll be back right after the break with the continuation of our interview with journalist and author John Vaillant on The Amber Mac Show.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome back to The Amber Mac Show. Before we get to our talk with urban planner Brent Toderian, here's the conclusion of Amber's interview with John Vaillant, author of Fire Weather, on forest fires, the environment, and the future of humanity as our climate changes.
What lessons have we learned then when we talk about the story of what took place in Fort McMurray? That again was back in 2016. That's almost a decade ago. What have we learned from a fire like this, and has anything changed?
Some things have changed, but not in Alberta, and not in Texas, and not in Florida, and now not in Washington, D.C., where they are in active climate denial, minimizing the risks and refusing to acknowledge the science that points directly toward fossil fuels in terms of the hazards we find ourselves facing every day in terms of rising temperatures and all the effects of that. So, what have we learned? I think people who are paying attention have learned that we need to have more than one exit route from our community. And there are a lot of new developments all across Canada that only have one road in and one road out, and that road can be blocked by fire. And then you can have a fire trap and you can lose a lot of lives. I think we're learning in some communities where there is Fire Smart, which is a really wonderful project that is, I don't think it's in every Canadian province and territory, but it's in many of the fire-prone ones. And here we can have firefighters come to our community, to our neighborhood, our cul-de-sac, our own backyard, and look at it through the lens of fire vulnerability. And so there's a lot that citizens can do, and there's a lot that citizens are doing in fire-prone areas to harden their gardens and neighborhoods against fire. There's a lot you can do for very little money or no money at all that can reduce the chances of destructive fire really by double-digit percentages. But these are stopgap measures. And what we really need is a government who is bold enough to face the threat climate poses and to lean aggressively into renewable energy, which is solar is the cheapest source of energy ever devised. And right now, China is running away with the future of energy. They own the renewables industry. They own the EV industry. BYD, a company many of your listeners may have never heard of, is the biggest EV car company in the world. China, the nation, is installing about 1.5 gigawatts of renewable energy every day. A gigawatt will power 750,000 to 1 million homes. And Canada is not doing that. Canada could do that. Canada could be a renewable energy superpower. We have infinite sun, infinite wind, infinite geothermal, 3 oceans worth of tidal, and abundant rivers. And we could power the nation and sell the rest to the US if we decided that was a national project that we wanted to engage in. And Canadians are capable of powerful, concerted action that makes a difference. And this is the difference we need to see in the 21st century.
Just as you're speaking, it reminds me, I was doing some research before our conversation. There was a headline in the Wall Street Journal in 2024 that said, pump more oil or reduce emissions. Canada tries to do both and angers everyone. And I think about this all the time. Now, at the time, it was a different leader in power in Canada. Of course, we've recently had a federal election and we have new leadership. We see Prime Minister Carney saying that Canada, like you said, can be a clean energy superpower. I, too, want to believe this. You know, I read your book and I thought we need this now more than ever. I've constantly been talking about clean tech for homes, things like heat pumps and solar. At the same time, maybe I'm just a little nervous about the future that we're going into because of, one, the power of some of these massive corporations. And also, I think there's a rise in misinformation and disinformation that we're seeing online that is sort of polluting the environment in terms of what is the truth around climate. How do you see things faring in the months to come? Do you think that there is potential that we can reach that goal of being a clean energy superpower? Or are there too many strong forces at play here that are going to distract us from that goal?
And right now, the petroleum industry has a disproportionate, really an unwholesome impact on our political system. That if you just look at the lobbying hours in Ottawa, and the fossil fuel industry outpaces any other energy source by orders of magnitude. And Alberta wields a kind of has a kind of intimidation factor that is disproportionate to its the actual role that it plays. And it's very hard for Ottawa to please Alberta under any circumstances. The fact about Alberta is it's filled with very skilled workers. It's a great place to expand wind and solar. It's a really sunny place. It's a really windy place full of people who want to work hard and are capable of technically sophisticated work and an amazing work ethic. So I don't see why Alberta, objectively couldn't actually lead the charge into renewables for Canada and really for North America. Right now, interestingly, Texas, really the twin sister of Alberta in the southern United States, is leading the entire continent in wind and solar. And Texas is oil country. It's very conservative. They have an official policy of climate denial. There are lots of really frightening things happening there politically and socially. but they understand the value of wind and solar. They know how to work. It's not that hard to install, and they're installing gigawatts worth of it. Not as fast as China, but they are leading even California, which would be the state you would expect to be the leader. But Texas is ahead of them. And that should tell Albertans something, and it should tell Canadians something.
Just a couple more questions for you, and thank you for being so generous with your time. I'm curious, after you write a book like Fire Weather and you go through this process of talking to so many people, learning so much about what happened back in 2016, what led up to the making of this beast of a fire, what does this do to you in terms of changing your perspective and purpose?
Well, it turned my hair gray, Amber. I'm not kidding.
Really? Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
It's no, it's really okay. It was worth it. But I saw things and heard things that I can't unsee and can't unhear while researching that book. And that's one reason I'm still talking about it 2 years later is I really don't want people to endure the trauma that people in Fort McMurray did, that people in Redding, California, which I also write about. These it does terrible damage to people and their property. And it was heartbreaking, the conversations I had with people in Fort McMurray who mercifully survived. Most of them survived the fire, thank goodness. But it left a mark. And, I really don't want to see that continue. So the other is I'm amazed the fact that people still want to talk about this really quite difficult and scary subject. I really can understand why people want to look the other way, why people don't want to deal with this. And the fact is, I've been touring and doing interviews with wonderful people like you literally for more than 2 years, all over the world. And people are bravely want to engage with this. And because they see the threat, it's real and it's present and it's right now. And look at the news. There's a flood or a fire every day somewhere, and they're getting bigger and worse. And the U.S. has had its worst flooding year in many decades. And there's a lot. We're barely halfway through the year, so there's a lot to come. So I really admire people, and I'm grateful for their willingness to engage with me on what's a hard, scary subject. But really, I think the only way through is by dealing with it. And we really do have viable solutions, affordable solutions, and a lot of people who have the skill to build this infrastructure that's needed. And it's happening in kind of fits and starts around the continent and around the world. But there's a lot of positive news out there in terms of the direction this energy transition is going in some communities. And there's an enormous amount we can do as individuals and as voters to shift the narrative in a more wholesome and future-oriented and healthy direction. And that's what I'm here for.
Last question for you. You say there's lots we can do as individuals. I think that's one question that people always have top of mind is, what can I do today? And I totally agree about shifting the narrative. One of the things that I'm trying to do on a small scale is just tell the truth about some of these options that exist out there and try to get people to weed through all of the misinformation and disinformation that does exist. What can individuals do to move us in a healthier direction? And I just want to add a little footnote there. When we talk about this transition that we're going through, it's not, of course, just to ensure that we have a brighter future. It's also, in many cases, a more cost-effective future. We know affordability is top of mind for so many Canadians, and this offers affordability, some of this clean tech that exists out there. So what can individuals do to help push us forward?
Well, the first would be to vote for candidates who recognize the threat climate change poses to our communities directly. The other is to look at how we can make our own neighborhoods and own houses less vulnerable to fire. So that's kind of at the crudest safety level. In terms of energy, the heat pump is a viable option. It's a relatively inexpensive option. Any new technology is going to cost some money. None of us had smartphones in 2006, and most of us will shell out 500 to $1,000. We'll buy them for our kids now. That's technology that works for people, and we've found a way to integrate it into our lives and found a way to afford it. Heat pumps will heat and cool your homes, and they work in Canada, and they work in really cold climates, and they work in hot climates, and Canada can produce both. The heat pump can, in almost every situation, accommodate both, and it's much cheaper to operate. So once you've got it installed, and they're really quiet, and they're much cleaner. So there are lots of pluses there. Obviously, the EV is another new expense, but a lot of people buy new cars, and rather than buying a new gasoline car, to get a new electric car is, a really viable option. Most of the people I know who have these vehicles really like them, and we are in a very exciting stage of history in terms of battery development. We're really at the beginning stages, but they're becoming much more efficient, much cleaner, much longer lasting. And so, the range, of an electric vehicle is growing every year, and the number of charging stations is also growing. And the fact that we can now charge from our homes is amazing. And the fact that a lot of us get our power from hydropower means that you can really run a clean vehicle. It's not a coal-fired generator that's powering your electric car. It's hydropower. And if you have solar, you can literally power it off the sun. And people are doing this. This isn't a pie in the sky fantasy that crazy people in Southern California are doing. People in Canada can do this. And in many parts of the country, we have the sun, we have the infrastructure to do it. So, and it means being a little bit brave and a little bit adventurous, but kind of like the smartphone, once you have it, it's really hard to imagine life without it. And it's an exciting possibility. And it's an adventure, and a lot of people are going on it with good results and feeling good about it. So that excites me.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much for writing this book, and thank you so much for spending so much time with me today. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to the next book, and thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks so much to John for being on the show, talking about such an important topic. Next up, we've got Brent Toderian on how we can make our cities better. That's after the break, so stick around.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Our next guest on the Amber Mac Show has been manager of Centre City Planning and Design for the City of Calgary, the director of City Planning for the City of Vancouver, and the founding president of the Council for Canadian Urbanism. Amber talked to Brent Toderian about making cities more livable, the role of bikes, and lots more. Here's their discussion.
Brent, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
I am really looking forward to speaking with you because I think most people who listen to this show live in cities, and I think most people want their cities to be better. That's probably a fair statement. And yet, in some cities across the country, I think we're having conversations that maybe aren't rooted in research and data. So I figured you were the perfect person to talk to.
That was very diplomatic. Okay.
The first thing I wanted to ask you about is this anti-cycling narrative that we're hearing online, particularly in the city where I live, in Toronto, because it has always been my assumption that we want more people cycling. It makes sense for a whole lot of reasons. And yet we're having these debates today about ripping out bike lanes, which looks like it may happen, and a lot of hate and sort of distrust towards the cycling community, which is a bizarre place to be. What's going on here?
Well, even calling it the cycling community kind of makes me cringe a bit because it's sort of us versus them, which is exactly what they're trying to do. Let's be really clear. There are some folks out there that might just have it wrong, not understand the concept of geometry in cities, that the more space we take, the less people can move, especially as our population is growing. All the other implications about how we get around. There might just be some folks who just don't get it yet. But there are a lot of people who are lying about it. There are, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm someone who's worked directly and been in decision-making rooms for over 33 years. And I can tell you definitively that there are politicians out there that have been told by their advisors that this is an effective wedge issue. It's a small percent of the public that actually thinks we should get rid of bike lanes, but they're the type that tend to base their vote on that action. So it's a very effective political strategy. They are lying. They are deliberately misinforming, and most of them actually know it. And so I get tired of being asked to sort of rebut the lies as if it's a good faith argument or a debate between opinion versus opinion, when it is really a debate about between evidence and deliberate misinformation. That's exactly what it is. So you apply that reality to the bike lane debate. You can call them cyclists. You can sort of create a divisive kind of feeling. There's even studies that have shown that people, when they're in their vehicles, look at cyclists as somewhat less than human. I just said it. I just said cyclists. People on bikes are seen as less than human. It is an effective psychological and political strategy, but it is incredibly irresponsible. It leads to people dying. It leads to cities getting worse and less successful for everyone, including drivers. So it doesn't just need to be rebutted. It needs to be called out for what it is, which is deliberate political lies. And by the way, media lies too, because media folks have realized, boy, it gets good clicks. So, what I say is if you hear anyone talking about the war on the car, which is a term created by the infamous passed away mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford, if they're using that language, that they're lying to you, that they're trying to make you feel attacked by the people who are just making other choices. And frankly, choices that are actually helping you, because there are fewer people in cars in front of you. That's just geometry. And it's either politicians trying to trick you into voting for them or media trying to trick you into clicking. That's just the truth.
So you mentioned the word evidence, and I would love to dive into that piece of it because I've been following you for a really long time. Let's talk about some of that evidence. Let's talk about cities where there are lots of people who bike. I'm going to stop calling it the cycling community. What's happening in those cities?
Well, there are cities where riding bikes is a very high percentage of the mode share. In other words, the percent of all trips in the city by each type of mode. But, I almost don't want to talk about those because those are the Amsterdams and the Utrechts and more recently the Parises. And they are very inspiring about a city like Paris is very inspiring about how fast it's been transforming its transportation infrastructure. It's not succeeding because it's an old city. It's succeeding because of new leadership. But in North America, there's often that whole, oh, well, yeah, but we're not Amsterdam. Doesn't this guy understand that we're not Amsterdam? Yeah, I get it. We're not Amsterdam. But we could be a lot smarter at what we do. And that's why I like cities that are doing it that are a bit counterintuitive. When Calgary did the smartest central area bike lane pilot and got a unanimous vote of council based on evidence that put in place their permanent bike lane. And then Edmonton, the other big Alberta city, I joke that the Battle of Alberta isn't just about hockey, it's about political credit. When they saw Calgary getting attention, they just went ahead and did the same or similar kind of bike network based on Calgary's success without a pilot. And I say, you can be inspired by Amsterdam. You can be inspired by Paris. I can flood you with stats and evidence. But what I say is when two Alberta cities know enough to do this, what's your excuse?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I probably asked this question a little bit selfishly because I have a 16-year-old son and he likes to bike. We all like to bike. And yet I'm fearful of him biking on some of our streets in Toronto and even more so now, thinking that some of the bike lanes may be ripped out. So, I think this affects the quality of life in our cities. And that's the piece to me that seems like it's missing from these conversations.
Mm. Well, that's because the deliberate tactic is to create an us versus them. When the truth is, and listen, I'm not a bike activist. Our family rides our bikes sometimes, but we walk and take public transit much more often than that. I'm not trying to be part of this culture war that they are trying to create. I'm an expert on cities that is evidence based. And the simple fact is this: if you understand all the goals we have for our cities, how to accommodate more people with less public costs and less space and lower emissions and fewer greenhouse gas emissions, particularly, better public health, more equity, more choice, more freedom, every definition of success I can talk about, shifting trips away from cars, from a straight geometry, and through more choice, not forcing anybody, but just providing more choice, more freedom. How can that be a bad thing? And the evidence shows that when you do that, it works better for everyone, including drivers, because they're trying to say that when you give anything to any of these other groups of folks trying to get around in any other ways, it's somehow hurting drivers. You're taking something away from the majority. That's just bad math. That's just bad sense of geometry. Because as I often say to folks when we're talking to them, if you don't want to stop driving, or you can't stop driving because frankly we've designed car dependency, then you will and can keep driving. But it's in your best interest to make sure that your neighbor on one side chooses to ride a bike, and neighbor on the other side chooses to take public transit, your other neighbors walk, particularly for short trips, which take up half the trips in our city. It blows our mind that half the trips in our cities are short trips, not long commuter trips or trips across the city to take your kids to hockey practice. Half the trips in our city are short trips that could reasonably easily, for many people, be converted into another kind of trip if they choose to. That works better for everyone. What we know is when you design car dependency, it fails for everyone, including drivers, because you're all stuck in traffic. That's just common sense. That really is just common sense. And it really bugs me when the people who are lying to you try to take the words common sense. More people drive, so we should plan for drivers. That's just common sense. No, that's a lie being called common sense. The
I,
actual common sense is the more people in your city who can move in less space with lower public costs and lower emissions, and cooling the city because we're getting hotter, and cleaning the air because the air is getting worse. All of that is common sense.
I totally agree with you, and yet at the same time, I also worry about this push for a return to the office and the issues that we face in some of our cities in terms of more traffic congestion, more cars on the road. This feels like one of those issues that no one has really thought about, or maybe they're lying about. I don't know what the answer is, but certainly, most of us who actually do like the idea of common sense can also do basic math, and with more people going to the office and more cars on the road, no matter how many bike lanes you ripped out, it's not going to get better.
Yeah, someone said to me recently that it's not more traffic, it's just returning traffic to how it was before the pandemic. But that's not exactly true. It is doing that, but add 5 or 6 years of population growth. So that's more cars. And we already had trouble before the pandemic. And ironically, for the 33 years I've been a planner, we have been talking about work from home as a component of the strategy for addressing the crushing congestion, et cetera. And we could never, I remember talking about this in the 90s, and we could never think of how can we ever get work from home to be higher than 5%, 2 or 3%, 5%. Because if you could get work from home to 10% or 20%, it would be revolutionary. Imagine taking off 20% of the cars, one out of every 5 cars. That would be a significant change. And then we had it in the pandemic. If there's a silver lining to a horrible thing, and I'm not flippant about saying that, my dad died of COVID during the pandemic.
I'm sorry.
So there's no real good that came out of it. But if there is a silver lining that came out of it, it's suddenly we all got good at the technology, the culture, realizing we didn't have to take so many physical trips. We could do things virtually. If anything, there might have been an overshoot. The idea that suddenly everything could be virtual. But instead of coming back after the pandemic and finding a new equilibrium that embraced the idea of work from home being part of a strategy, you've got business owners or business runners just unilaterally making decisions saying, we want you back to 4 days right away, and next year, 5 days a week, because we're not convinced your efficiency is good, even though studies suggest your efficiency is still pretty good. It probably depends on the nature of the position. Well, it does depend. But so there needs to be a conversation about how it affects society, not just the businesses, because that tends to be the beginning and the end of the media discourse. How does it affect efficiency? As if all we are cogs in a machine instead of people trying to operate a society in a way that works well.
Absolutely. And I think also another thing that at least I'm seeing happen, and when I've been looking at some of the things that you're writing about, I know you're talking about this as well, is that as our cities get more populated, as we have less room for cars to move around, the vehicles are actually getting bigger. I every couple of days see a
Yes.
Cybertruck in downtown Toronto, and I look at it and think there's just not room on these streets for this truck. Like, whether you like Elon or not, there's just not a lot of space for a truck like this. And I'm reminded of a quote that you shared in your feed that said, "Innovation makes useful things smaller and smaller. Overconsumption makes things bigger and bigger and more dangerous with bigger costs and consequences." I would love you to unpack that.
Well, the Cybertruck is the latest super obnoxious example of this, but it didn't need such a fundamentally ugly and ridiculous vehicle to make the point for us that vehicles were too big already. And it's just as much about your standard family SUV as it is about someone who's making the choice in this day and age to support Elon Musk financially. So this was already a problem. And it was playing out in before the Cybertruck. It was the idea of an electric Hummer. And does your brain break at the concept that a Hummer can be good? Well, of course it's not good, because it takes the battery materials and energy of 5 or 6 smaller vehicles to make a Hummer green, which it isn't. And by the way, we have Jevons paradox, which says that every time we've improved the technology and made something greener, people end up using it more. So we've actually seen the studies show that per capita, our emissions are going up because we're driving further. We're driving more. Ironically, a lot of people are buying a third vehicle, and that's the electric vehicle. They might have stayed at 2 if it weren't for the electric vehicle. Now, I'm a supporter of electric technology as an alternative to internal combustion vehicles, but not if we end up driving more and further. So you've got the added issue of, with your vehicles getting bigger, it's kind of like, how can we take a bad situation and make it worse? We've already got too much driving, too much car dependency, no choice really in our design of cities and suburbs, particularly, for other ways of getting around. And now let's add to that, we're going to make the vehicles even bigger and more dangerous, not just bigger to hold people, more kids, more groceries. Let's make the front inherently more dangerous, so that it's far more likely to not see a kid and to kill a kid when it hits the kid. And so we have this cumulative effect going on of too much driving, too much car dependency, and the vehicles getting more polluting or using more materials if they're electric and still polluting because there's still tire pollution, etc. And at the same time, becoming more dangerous in the name of an arms race for more safety. I've got to have a bigger vehicle or else I'm not keeping my family safe. And everybody outside your vehicle is in greater danger, legitimately greater danger. And we have to remember the number one killer of kids and teens in the entire world is car crashes.
It's so sad when you do look at all of this data, and I would love to talk to you more about this, but I also want to talk a little bit about some cities that are maybe getting it right here at home, here in Canada, if that is actually happening.
I recently collaborated with the mayor of Paris to do an exhibition at City Hall in Paris about climate action through city building. And one of the points I made is I haven't seen a city that's doing things perfectly. I've seen cities that are trying harder and cities that are not trying at all. And frankly, are putting great effort into still protecting the wrong thing from change. But what inspires me are the cities that you don't expect to do better, but are. They are doing better. In Canada here, Montreal is probably the most inspiring city in North America in recent years. They're transforming streets into people places. They're doing safe bike infrastructure and shifting mode share. They're doing a lot of smart, good city building. Edmonton has been getting a lot of attention, not because the city is a perfect city, but because the planning system, the planning department, the leaders are doing bold things that you think, wow, I can't believe Edmonton is doing that. They were the first major Canadian city, major North American city to get rid of parking minimums and let that the answer for parking not be determined by an excessively high parking regulation at City Hall. And that's just one example of many things they've been doing in terms of innovation. I also like the smaller cities in Canada. I've been advising the city of Kingston, Ontario for 7 years now. And it's not that they're perfect, but boy, the transformation in culture and attitude and intention and aspiration and how it's translating into better planning. I'm inspired working with them every day. And it shows that cities of that size and vintage, they used to describe themselves as being very conservative, very hard place for things to change when I first started working for them. Now I'm starting to talk about the Kingston model instead of the Vancouver model as an inspiring North American model. And frankly, there are a lot more cities the size of Kingston than there are cities the size of Toronto. So I see inspiration everywhere I look, not because they're nailing it, but I like the cities that are trying to punch above their weight, that are not afraid to work harder, not window dressing. I'm not impressed by the cities that declare a climate emergency and just do business as usual, but the cities that are actually working hard to make change. And I've worked in city halls, so I know how hard that is. You can't do it on a dime, but you can do it a lot faster than any of us have given us the excuse to accept.
That's all for our Midsummer Special on the Amber Mac Show, but you can listen to us every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, as well as throughout the weekend on SiriusXM Canada Talks Channel 167. Plus, you can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts for all of our audio content, and check out Amber's YouTube channel for videos of all our segments. We hope you're having a great summer so far. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with Amber for a brand new episode of The Amber Mac Show. See you then.